Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
You guys are here tonight to hear all about trip planning, leading in an outdoor situation. Our speaker, Sam Grubasic, is a lifelong enjoyer of outdoor activities, cycling, hiking, anything on the water, and exploring new neighborhoods in search of ice cream. Sam would make a good rover. I've known Sam for 10, 15 years or something like that from kayaking. In 1999, even before I did, Sam found kayaking and fell in love with the freedom and the sense of adventure that the craft allowed for. He started pursuing leadership and coaching kinds of opportunities, and he has the British Canoeing Union's Advanced Sea Leader, which used to be called 5-star for those of you who are familiar with that. He got that in 2019, and now he's working towards the American Canoeing Association's L4 Coastal Kayak Coach Award. In 2020, Sam started Freshwater Paddle Sports, which is a Twin Cities kayak and leadership training business. His website is www.freshwaterps.com. And Sam believes that the idea of adventure is open to individual definition. And with a little bit of knowledge, anybody can share their adventure with others. So Sam, welcome. And we're going to hear about trip planning.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming out again tonight. Again, my name is Sam. Thank you, Fran, for the introduction. Tonight we are gathered to talk about trip planning, trip leading, the skills, the hard skills, the soft skills that make a trip outside successful. I am a paddler, but you know, as Fran mentioned, I grew up outdoors in Boy Scouts. I love hiking and canoeing and yes, looking for new ice cream in the neighborhood. And all of those things are taking the dog for walks. We live in Southwest Minneapolis, right on the Greenway. So the idea of just being outside is just baked into how we operate and how my wife and I kind of interact with the world. So, leading trips is kind of a natural progression of that. The talk tonight is a very condensed version of a bigger course. We've got some of ISK members here tonight who have suffered through that with me. But tonight we're talking about leading and planning outdoor adventures. And of course, we're going to have a technological. There we go. Okay, before we get started, I just want to have everybody take a couple of moments and hop in that Wayback Machine in your brain and think about a trip that you took. Let's start with some definitions. A trip is outside. I don't care if it's an afternoon or multi-day or multi-week. A trip is going outside and doing something and enjoying nature and going somewhere. So let's just start with that trip of definition of a trip. But in your mind, think about a trip that you took that was awesome. What made it great? Who was with you? Did they make it great? What did the leader do that was really good? Why do you look back on that memory and think, yeah, that was pretty great. I'd love to do that again. While you've got that spinning around in your head, flip the coin over. Think about the opposite trip, the trip where everything went to heck, where it was miserable. And start to distill that down into what went wrong and why it wasn't great. What we're going to talk about tonight is how to minimize the opportunity for things to go sideways, to mitigate personalities, kind of the psychology of groups under stress, how to plan and anticipate what may go sideways, and stack the deck in your favor as a leader so that when those things do happen, you're like, I got a plan for that. It's easy. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So question to the group, how many people here lead trips for the Rovers? Super. Do you wish there were more leaders or people in Rovers that raise their hand to take people outside? Yes. What is a barrier? What causes people not to raise their hand?
Fear.
Fear of what?
Won't do it right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What else? What else gets in the way? I'm sorry?
Maybe don't know how.
Huge. Yep. Yeah. Don't know how.
I think somebody would want to do what they're thinking of.
Right. Why would anybody else want to go see that thing? The biggest ball of twine in the world. Right. Let's go. Okay. Are there any other reasons why somebody may not, Fran?
Concern about how people might get along.
Mm-hmm. Group psychology. Holy cow. That could be like a week course of how people relate to each other, especially when you're sleep deprived or your tummy's hurt because you ate some dodgy curry the night before or whatever that is. But yeah. So as we start this conversation about planning trips and thinking about that, I think one of the most powerful tools that you have in your disposal is to think about the people who are coming with you on this trip have had really good trips and they've had really bad trips. And there's a reason why they're not doing what you're doing. So keeping that kind of mindset as you're planning will help you plan around that. Cool. I should also put out there, if you have questions, please just shout them out. There's no formality of no hands in the air, just shout them out. I am a paddler, but this presentation, and I have tools for you, handouts and PDFs. They are sport or activity agnostic. You can use them for anything. Instead of printing a bunch of paper and just bringing them, I will provide a link for you to download them and use them. And the most important bit, edit them to yourself. All of the things that I'm talking about tonight, all of the documents I have shamelessly stolen from friends and leaders and kind of shaped to be my own. So if you make a better version of something that I'm sharing tonight, please share it with everybody else and share that out. So let's start with, what is the role of a leader? And I think you can put that role into 4 buckets. Communication, which should be probably bucket 1, 2, 3, and 4, but communication is the first one. Selecting the route or selecting where you want to go, shaping that environment, and then matching the ability with the challenge. So the sweet spot is when you get all of the alchemy of those 4 things. When they come together well, you look like a hero. We're going to talk about each one of these 4 buckets in depth, but I think that after lots of years leading trips, I think these are the 4 that I like to really spend time on. So knowing that those are the 4 buckets, as a leader, this is the mantra that I think I always have rolling through my head. And if we build on this idea that as a leader, you're thinking, should I stay or should I go? Now it should be, should we go? But I like the clash, so we're going to stick with should I stay or should I go? What is the group vibe? It's the hardest thing to control. I don't even know if you can control it. It's the hardest thing to say it's working or it's not working. And if it's not working, how do I kind of turn the corner? And then the third one is, what is it going to look like in 3 hours? What's the weather going to be like in 3 hours? Are people eating enough now so that in 3 hours they're not crabby? Are they, what's the group doing? Is there one person that's going faster than everybody else or going slower than everybody else? So we may be jiving now, we may be clicking as a group, but in 3 hours, what are the forces that are acting on me that I should be thinking about now before that 3-hour mark comes. So I'm already ahead of where it is. So should I stay or should I go? What's the group vibe? And what do I think it's going to look like in 3 hours? So here's the first tool that I have shamelessly stolen from friends and leaders out in specifically the paddling world. The first time I really saw this tool was from a group of coaches from the Orcas Island and the San Juans in Washington. Shauna and Leon, they came up with this idea that as a leader, your number one responsibility is to identify risks and talk about them openly. So the idea behind this is that you've got this bullseye, and we're going to talk about this bullseye about 3 times in this talk. But the general idea with this is, as a leader, the day before a trip, I'm going to sit down with my list of participants. I'm going to look at the weather forecast. I may drive to the trailhead and kind of make sure that there's no road construction that's getting in the way. But before the day even starts, I'm going to think about these 4 things: environment, group, conditions, and gear. And I'm going to put a little dot in the upper left-hand quadrant. So I'm going to think about environment. Do I know about the place that I'm going to go? If I'm leading a trip on the Greenway bike trail, that's a known quantity for me. I do that all the time. So for me, my little dot for environment familiar is way out in the green. Super comfortable with that. And as I work my way in, my start and stop points. Is the parking lot open? Are there enough spots for the 20 people that have signed up for my trip? Are there bathrooms? Has the city taken the porta potties out of the parking lot yet? Garbage cans. Do I need a parking permit to park there, or is it one of the few free spots where I can park a car? Green, yellow, red, route. Are the animals I need to think about? Then I'm going to go to my group. Is this a group where somebody had to sign up and tell me they're coming? Or is this a meetup where I don't know who's coming? That might be a red for me. Now, a red isn't necessarily a no-go, but when you start getting dots in the red, that's where you go, okay, this is something I need to think about. This is something I'm going to have to spend some time working out. So the day before, I fill in all of these quadrants based on my assumption, my pre-work the day before anybody's standing in front of me. That's what this is. Now, how you use this as a leader, as we get in a couple of minutes, we'll get to where you do this by yourself as a leader. You do it with the group when you all show up. And then in your mind, as you're riding west on the Greenway, you're doing it again in your head because you've still got maybe another hour or so and the temperature's changing or the wind's changing. Any questions about this? Anybody seen this before? No? I'll give you. You'll have your own copy at the end. Another tool that I came up with was a quick little pocket, like a jersey pocket or in my pack or in my PFD. A little something that I fill out that's a partner document to the bullseye. And or I have to write it out. So folds in the middle. The left side is what I fill out. I'm going to fill out where we're going, the route I'm going to take, the miles, the weather forecast. I'm going to write that all kind of over there. Gates. Gates are decision points. If you're a climber, it'd be called cruxes. If you're hanging out with Brits, they're called gates. A gate is a thing that is going to be the most difficult. It could be a place, could be a time. But it's a part of the day where everything is easy, and then you're gonna have to stop for a minute and think about it. So if we want to really beat up on this Greenway example again, is I'm coming around, and before I hit the big bridge that goes over Hiawatha, I've got to cross over that busy 4-lane road. Minnehaha, thank you. Where the cars rarely stop for you, that's a gate. Like if I'm leading a group of cyclists, in my mind, I'm like, okay, so I've got some thoroughbreds that are going fast. I got some people that are going slow. I got a couple of people that aren't really super awesome on their bikes in crowds. And I'm going to come up to Minnehaha. That's a gate. That's a thing that I need to think about. I'm going to fill that all in. I'm going to do the weather forecast the day before, and then my total risk assessment results from the bullseye if I'm green, yellow, or red. Cool. Then the other side is that same exercise, but the morning of, sorry, am I blocking? The morning of with your group and then on the go. So it's the same kind of the tool, just in a different format, because we all learn differently and hold on to data differently. This is a full disclosure. This is a newer tool for me. I've used it for this year on the water with people. I still like the bullseye more. I like the graphic nature of the bullseye, but to have just a little something stuck in my PFD that's got the weather forecast so I can be out there and ratify. Yep, wind's still blowing out of the south. Yep, still about 10 miles an hour. Yep, this looks right, so I don't have to worry about weather. But just to have that thing tucked away. Cool. All right. Couple of acronyms as leaders rolling through your head, along with should I stay or should I go? What's the group vibe? And what's it going to look like in 3 hours? The first one is clap. And as a leader, my job is to think about these 4 things. First, C is communication. Do I have the ability to communicate with everybody in my group? It could be a visual, a wave. It could be a whistle. But can I physically talk to or communicate with everybody in my group? Because if we're riding on that bike trail and somebody in the back falls down or has an accident and the people in the front just keep on going, that's a bummer, right? So being able to stay together as a group. So communication is the first one. Line of sight. As a leader, can I see everybody in my group? So on that bike trip, if you've got somebody who's going fast, sometimes that's okay. Let them go fast. But can I still see where they are? Can I still communicate with them? So communication, line of sight, awareness or avoidance is the A. I'm going to talk about risk and hazards a lot. A risk or a hazard, I think it's kind of a bad rap. It isn't always where somebody could get hurt. A risk or a hazard could be somebody does get hurt, the group gets separated, somebody has a interpersonal conflict with somebody else. Anything that's going to make that trip kind of a bummer, that's a risk. That's a hazard. So in my pre-planning, the next couple of slides is going to really dive into this. In the pre-planning, I'm anticipating where that conflict or where that hazard or where that risk may show up. And I make plans to go around it. So I have to be aware of what it is. Hiawatha, that's an awareness. Can't avoid it. You got to get over the bridge somehow. So you got to figure out how to get across that street. And then the P stands for position of maximum effectiveness. If somebody does fall down in the back of the group, am I in a position in the group where I can help that person out? So, question of the group. Does a leader always have to be in the front of the group or the back of the group or in the middle of the group? Where does a leader position themselves when they're leading? Where do you like to be?
So we have sometimes co-leaders and calls. Like on hikes, if there's, and there could be 30 of us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we have sweeps and so we don't just have one
Yeah.
person and we've actually split up into different hiking groups because some people are faster or slower. So you sound very organized and cohesive, and we're not always that cohesive. I think we keep safety in mind, but I think we're not as structured.
You're jumping ahead. I love that. I really do. I know. I honestly do. The idea of being a single person leader to any group size is rough. And it's probably a reason why a lot of people don't raise their hand to lead trips. It really is. I think it's a brilliant pro move to split a group into goals. I mean, if you've got a group of photographers and a group of thru hikers that show up for the same hike, trouble brewing, right? So split them, absolutely split them into groups. So for rovers, when you split into groups, do you then have 5 leaders, or is there still one person that's kind of calling the shots? How does that structure work?
I think there's one person calling the shots, but so on a hike we were at in the last month or so, the group got separated, so there was a slower and faster, and we communicated by phone or by text.
Love it.
And also on some of those hikes, I mean, the faster people do stop and wait for the slower people. But if the slower people are just so much slower, in that instance, the slower people said, just don't worry about us because we've got enough that we can keep track of ourselves.
Yep.
But we're communicating by phone.
Communication, first one. Yeah, for sure. So
might want to repeat that because people online probably didn't hear what she said.
yes, yeah. So that's I have to bear in mind that there's an audience out there. Yeah. So I apologies to the online participants here, but we just had a really nice side conversation about if a bigger group splits into separate groups at different speeds or different goals or different motivations or whatever that reasoning is, Rover still maintains a person who is the trip leader. And I use that word kind of looser here, trip leader. Laura, I keep looking for ratify, like, yep, you're on track. Awesome. Great. And you brought up this beautiful point that even when you do break out, you're communicating, you're staying communication, right? So clap still applies. And another reason why I super love that is if you didn't and you forced people into this, no, we're going to stay together, I'd wager that most of the participants aren't going to have fun, right? So you are mitigating one of the risks, which is that interpersonal conflict before you even start. Like, that's lovely. Perfect.
Well, you're mitigating losing people.
Yeah. Yeah. Because ultimately, as an outdoor club, you want people to go do the things. That's why we exist. This is the last little bit of there's a word that I'm forgetting right here, but this is my last little school side of this. But when something does go sideways, somebody does fall off their bike, there is a collision, somebody slips and sprains an ankle on the SHT, whatever that is, the person who is in charge of either the group or the smaller group responds to that, right? So here is the little mantra for when you are going to come in and fix something, and it's called SAFER. Who's wilderness first aid trained in the room? Why do you put the gloves on? There's 2 reasons why you put the gloves on before you walk into a scene. Number 1 is to protect yourself. And number 2 gives you time to think, right? Just that 5 or 10 seconds of putting your gloves on gives you a moment to take a breath, assess the scene. If you rush in there, you're going to miss something. If you focus on the blood on the arm, you might miss something truly bad, right? So the first step as a leader is to just stop. Whether I charge into Fred's issue right now or wait 5 seconds is not going to change Fred's condition, but it's going to buy me a ton of time to sort it out, to think about it. The next is to assess. So I'm going to look at what's happening. I'm going to figure out what happened. Why are we in this position? Who's involved? How many people are involved? I'm going to make my plan, and then I'm coming in. I'm going to execute it. And here's the part that I think a lot of newer, or if you haven't had this gift, is that if what you're trying isn't working, stop and reassess. Classic example of this in paddling is, I'll set the scene. You're up on the Apostle Islands in the caves. The waves are making you bounce around. Somebody tips over, falls out of their boat. Rescuer rushes in there to get the person, but the person is exhausted. And the rescuer is just trying to get them back on their boat. Person's not going in the boat, but the rescuer just keeps on trying the same thing over and over again and having no results, but keeps on trying. If what you're trying to do isn't working, just stop. Stop and take a minute and look at it. Try something else. All right. Let's move on to something a little bit more fun than that. Communication. Remember the 4 buckets: communication, select the route, shape the route, and then match the experience to the day. Communication. Again, communication should be buckets 1, 2, 3, and 4. I would be willing to bet hot chocolate that every time you've had a lousy experience, whether it's on a trip, at work, at home with your person, with your kids, if something's gone bad and you're not happy about the way that thing happened, if you sat down and thought about it, it'd go back to communication. Every blessed time, communication is the biggest part. So we're planning a trip, and we're going to talk about a trip that I saw on the Rovers website here in just a couple of minutes. And I've lost track of my time, and I want to make sure that I stay good. Okay. So communication starts beforehand, and you did a little bit of it here tonight. Pre-trip communication while you're putting it on the website. You're thinking up a trip. Where do I want to go? When do I want to do it? Why do I want to go there? Who do I want to have come on this trip? What are my goals? What is the pace? And then the float plan might be a plan that you leave at home for the person who's not going. So people know where you're going and where you're going to be camping and when to expect you home. My club, the other club that I joined, that I'm a member of, Inland Sea Kayakers, ISK, Rovers, we all put our stuff on the websites, right? We put all of this information up. So before anybody even raises their hand, they know where we're going. The trip contract would be for a bigger trip. Probably isn't necessary for a day trip. But let's say we're going to go backpacking in the Wind River. Beautiful trip, a lot of days, a lot of things can go wrong. You are going to want to know who's going on your trip, so you may go on some practice hikes together. And on those practice hikes, you may talk about these things. What's our decision-making model? How are we going to decide things together as a group? What's the structure going to be? Are we going to be okay with breaking up into groups? If there's a day where somebody wants to go fast or go slow or take pictures of the sunrise, how are we going to make that all work out? What are the expectations of everybody? And you're going to want to say, are we on the same page? Because there's nothing worse than driving 3 days to do a multi-day trip and you get on like day 3 of the trip and you're like, I want to go home. This is not fun anymore. So, and then I think it's super important to talk about what if the stuff hits the fan? Like, what are we going to do? Are you cool sorting it out as a group? Or if I push the EPIRB, are you willing to let that process happen? Let's all talk about that as a group. And then at the starting line. So here you are. You've done all the pre-work, you know who's there, you're standing at the trailhead, you're ready to go. And what you're going to do is you're going to walk through, in the paddler's world, we call it a pre-launch. But it just means we're going to go out on this thing now together as a group. We've done all this communication. Let's just make sure we're good. HEAT stands for human, equipment, environmental, and time. So you're going to talk through how many people do we have? What are our goals? So the human side, people, how are you feeling? Everybody tired, well rested, whatever. You could do all kinds of things to gauge people here, but we want to talk about the human aspect. Equipment, who's got first aid kits? I mean, how many times have you shown up a backpacking trip and everybody's got their own tent, their own cook set, their own giant first aid kit? Like bonkers. Who's got what? What can we leave behind? What do we have extra? Are we cool with that? Environment, this is where we're at. This is the weather that we're expecting. This is what I think the weather is going to turn into. If you're on the water, we talk about the boat traffic that might be out there. If you're on a bike trip, you might talk about intersections that you're going to have to get through, but you're going to talk about the environment and then timing. This is super important, especially if you're weekend warriors and you got to be back to work Sunday night. So you go to work on Monday. We will be off the trail by 3 p.m. so that we can be back in the cities at a reasonable time. And then sticking to that. And then just talking about your communication. How are we going to communicate? And then as you're motoring along, as a leader, you're thinking about what are the changes of the environment? Is there any road construction I need to worry about? Has a protest popped up that I wasn't even thinking about and now Washington Ave is closed? Got to think about that. What's the weather doing? Situational awareness, so I'm just watching the group. Here's your risk assessment, the CLAP, group spacing. How long is the leash? How long do you let those fast people go? And is it okay? A couple of tricks to the thoroughbreds that take off. If you don't split into pods and take off, it's super easy to say, you know what, Fran, you're going to take off fast. Great. Just don't go past this trail intersection. Do your own thing. Have fun, but wait for us there. That way, at least you bring the group back together. And then the end of the day, recap the day, what went well, what didn't go well. This is a good time as a leader to ask for feedback. Hey, I made a call after lunch that we weren't going to stop because the weather was changing and I wanted to get back here. Is everybody you okay with that? Let's talk about that. It really gives people a time that if they want to say something, instead of stewing about it all the way back to the cities, driving all the way back and then letting it spin around in their head, it gives them time to talk about it. You might learn something as a leader, but it also gives kind of that pressure valve to let that experience kind of fade away a little bit. And then the last thing, the fun part, when you're all said and done, send pictures out. Share your pictures. Social media, whatever you're doing, but tag each other. That's always fun to see all of that. All right, so that was a lot of stuff really quick, but what I'd like to do is go into this next little bit, which is a little bit more participatory. But any challenges or questions or thoughts about communication and that part of the leadership agreement? Communication is the first one. The next thing is we want to select our route. A lot of things here, but you're looking at the map, right? You're like, I want to go to this place, and we all get our maps out because we're dreamers. And we start thinking about where do we want to go? What do we want to see? Why do we want to go there? And that's what selecting the route is. We're really thinking about where do we want to go? How long is our whole trip going to be? Do I want to do it in 1 day or 2 days or 10 days? And how long do I want those days to be? And you really just start kind of planning out where you're going and what are those days going to look like. Look at the weather trends. You think about the external influences of like traffic, trail conditions, the distance between attractions. I think I had to learn the hard way, especially like say you're hiking on the North Shore on the SHT, and I want to see this. I want to see Split Rock, and then I want to see this waterfall. And all of a sudden, and I did this to my wife, and God bless her for staying with me, but in my mind, it was going to be like 6 miles, and it ended up being like 20, and it was miserable. At the end of the trip, it ended up being a fantastic trip, but in the moment, we're both just trudging along, just like, how much longer do I have to go to get to this damn waterfall? And what's so special about this waterfall that Sam wants to see? So planning the distance between those things makes a really big difference in the day. And if you can sprinkle something fun in, like every 90 minutes or an attraction, it really gives those nice little touch points to keep things interesting and fun. And then group mix. This one can be a tricky bit. Are most of the trips for rovers, like you got to sign up and say, I'm coming, or are there meetup kind of situations?
I would say day hikes or maybe meetup, but multi-night trips are sign up. You gotta know who's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just decide the day. Well, you gotta.
Yeah.
You see, sometimes there's a deadline to see, this date you gotta decide.
Yeah. That's a great way to mitigate that interpersonal bit. I've got friends that lead trips in the San Francisco Bay on the water as a meetup. And I'm like, are you bonkers? Like, water's cold and it's fast and it's windy and you don't know who's showing up in the boat they're going to show up in and their skill level. And so knowing who's coming, I think is a huge tool for that. All right. And then shaping the environment, we're really thinking about where are my decision points? Where are my safe zones? Have I built in flexibility? The last little thing, and this is super fast, is this is that group psychology a little bit of matching the ability with the challenge. And this is that control that was mentioned earlier. As a leader, do you stay on the right-hand side of that where it's going to be fun and no rules and everything goes and everybody's going to have fun, but you're really not sure what's going to happen? Or are you going to be on the far left-hand side where you're going to try to control everything? And I would challenge that throughout the day or throughout the trip. As a leader, you kind of slide on that spectrum, right? If you lock yourself into a control leader, you're going to know what's happening all the time, but you're going to bum people out. And if you're too much on the loosey-goosey side, something might happen that you don't have control over. So as kind of thinking about where you need to be in that moment along that continuum will help you a lot. Common traps for leadership, or when trips go sideways. We've been here so many times, I could do this in the back of my hand. You get sloppy with risks and you might miss something. Kodak courage. I just want to go a little bit closer to get that picture for Insta, right? That's Summit fever. How many times have you made the bad decision in hindsight that we shouldn't have gone that extra day, but we'd already driven 3 days to see this thing, and you just kind of maybe push the safety envelope just a little bit because you've already invested the time off from work and the miles in the car and it's just, we got to do it because we're here. The expert halo, this happens a lot in our group. Oh, Fred's here. Everything's fine. We got this. And nobody pays attention to the map and nobody's watching the weather because you know what? Fred will take care of everything. In the meantime, Fred's just along for a paddle. He has no idea that all of a sudden everybody's kind of heaped to this responsibility on Fred, poor Fred. And then something goes wrong and all the heads pivot to Fred. It's like, what? Identifying who the leader is and what's going to happen. And then the meetup effect, we talked about that a little bit. Sorry, Fred. All right, so case study. Who went on the Willow River State Park December 1st on the Rovers website? Anybody do that? Let's look at that through the context of what we've just been talking about. So here's what was on the website. Pre-trip communications. The when, the where, the who, the goals, the place was all laid out. The communication was aces. Nice work, Rovers. Very strong start to this trip. We know exactly where we're going, why we're going, how long we're going to walk, where we're going to walk. Super great. Pre-trip communications, nailed. The next part of the leadership bit is who was putting this on. Karen. Okay. So ahead of time, Karen may have been looking at the map for Willow River and was thinking about where I want to park, which is the nature center in the lower left-hand corner. Right. This is what was called out in the posting. And you were going to hike to the falls. Can't make it. Falls right here. So what's the natural path that one might take? Green through the parking lot to blue to gray, right? That seems like to be about the route that one might take on this trip. Let's say you looked at your group and all of a sudden the idea of a 3-mile hike maybe wasn't so great. We've got somebody with a bad hip, or we're going to bring their young kids along. Starting and stopping options, you may not park at the nature center. You may start one group in this middle 300 campground. You may start over here, but having a plan on where you're going to start and stop. You may stage a car in one of those other parking lots, just because. I know it's only 3-ish miles or so, but you're thinking about it. The write-up talked about how long you were going to walk and how far it would be and about how long it would take. And she'd also be, it was Karen, right? Karen would be thinking about the weather, which is coming up here in a little bit. So this is just a little bit of pre-work. I'm thinking about the route. I'm thinking about how we're going to get there, kind of planning through it. Select the route. I'm assuming the route was going to be green to blue to gray to see the falls. That's the route. There are other routes that would be available. If you take off from the nature center and you get to the falls and you thought it would take you an hour and a half, and you got there in 45 minutes, and the group is looking like they want a little bit more. As a leader, you'd have that in the back of your head. Oh, you know what? Instead of going back on Willow Falls, why don't we take the Pioneer down to the Oak Ridge Trail and tack on all that extra mileage? You've already got that plan in your head. Leg length. So like from the nature center parking lot to the egg-shaped 360 campground is about 3/4 of a mile, 0.8 of a mile. So that leg length and then you kind of, you can extrapolate what the the Willow Falls, maybe that's a little more than a mile. So you kind of got the leg length planned out. Where on this map would be a crux point or a decision point or a point where you may have to think about things a little bit different? And I had to reach for this a little bit. Under the assumption that we go from the nature center on the green trail through the 300 to the blue to the falls, where are the parts where as a leader you're going to have to think a little bit harder? Bathroom stops, for sure. Yep. Stay with me here. I'm going to say the road around the campground, because there's going to be cars and people looking for a campsite and not looking for walkers. So that might be a place where I bring the group back together, get through that, and then let the people go again. Okay. Cool.
Huge hill. Very steep.
Yeah, so the topo lines don't show up super awesome on the overhead here, but on the computer they do. So absolutely thinking about what's the topography as we're going through here. What are we going to run into? When you get to the falls, right here, there's a little bit more topography. So I'm thinking about that.
You know, and would there be an overlook, like where yeah, like
Over there.
would we lose people on overlook? Do we all stop and just hang out for 10 minutes while people go? If there's an overlook, like what are distractions in the right word, but what are distractions along the way that people stop?
Yeah. So we're also thinking about that 90-minute mark, right? I want to put things about every 90 minutes. So what's the distance from the nature center parking lot to like here? It's like a mile, 1.2 miles, right? If we walk at 3 miles an hour, we're there in 20 minutes. So we're way ahead of the curve, but that's a great time to stop and bring people together and put a candy bar in people's mouths and that kind of thing. Also be looking at pictures. So these are the trails at the Willow River. And those are the falls that we're going to. Nothing too challenging, right? Pretty easy. What was the weather? It was forecasted for 33 degrees Fahrenheit and light breezes. Not a bad day for walking in the woods. Pretty lovely. However, if I'm walking through my risk bullseye, where would you anticipate risk on a lovely day on December 1st, walking through the woods at 33 degrees? Suppose there's some spray maybe in the air down around the falls. Could be icy. Hunters, for sure. It's Wisconsin. If we're going to paint with a broad brush. Yep. Sorry, Wisconsinites on the call.
You know, depending on when you got started, the later it gets in the day, it's getting darker and colder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, summertime, we have all daylight, but
Yeah.
wintertime, the daylight is less.
Gets to be about 2:30, 3 o'clock. You should really be thinking about, yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Biking trips, we worry about it getting dark and, you know, not everybody's got a light.
So these are all things that you're thinking about as a leader, right? What if somebody does get cold? Do I have an extra hat and gloves in my backpack that I can just hand out? It takes no space in your pack. If you can pull out, I love to keep a size extra large mitten, hat, and a extra down compressible jacket that I can just hand to anybody. Be like, put this on. Easy. Maybe we had to drive separate vehicles to get there. And the group gets separated, then you got to sit and wait for 20 minutes for that other group to get there. We talked about mixed ability. There may actually be a legit like medical thing. Somebody may not have moderated their diabetes well. Right? So you may have to deal with that. And then other things. I didn't even think about the daylight, so thank you for bringing that up. Love that. Thank you. But you're thinking about all these things and you're thinking about what are the things that could go wrong? And not always bad, like somebody got hurt, but somebody got cold or hungry or just something simple. Somebody sprained an ankle. Can I deal with that with what I have in my backpack? Do I have that knowledge to just deal with that in real time? Okay, it is just a couple minutes before 8 o'clock, so I think we've run out of time. What I want to do, however, though, is I told you that I have all of this available to you. So the slide deck, the bullseye, the pocket guide. I've uploaded all of this stuff to my website. And the resource button at the top, on there it says presentation materials, and the password is all caps FWPS materials. So you can log on and grab that. You're taking a picture. Super. And if you need to email me, of course, do that right through there. Yeah, so for those of you online, the comment was that there seems to be a lot of organization to this as compared to some of the day trips that rovers take. And I'll tell you, I know this talk very much is on the academic side. It's very structure based. I believe that if you spend a little bit of the time at home in your preparation in that structure mode, even if it's 10 minutes, really kind of looking at the maps, looking at the weather, looking at the group. If you do that when you get out with the group, it can really loosen up. It's when you don't put the time in ahead of time and you're loose the day of, that's where things can slip. So just a little bit of that pre-work goes a really long way, even for a super casual day thing, for sure. There are no questions.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.